Hey guys, and welcome back to Rebooted MCU. Today we're going to talk about Phase 2. Now, I'm going to break up the next couple episodes of this into two parts because I really want to dive into the stories of these projects a little bit more. And I just want to go ahead and say I really appreciate the positivity shown on the first episode. I really like doing this. It allows me to sort of research the characters more and be creative in a way that I really don't have with any of the other projects. So I do plan on doing this consistently. It might take a little bit longer to get these episodes out because, again, I do have to write a lot of stuff for these projects. But, again, I enjoy it. So I appreciate all the positivity. And without further ado, I do have to clarify something from the first episode as we completely glanced over what happens with the Space Stone. Because as we mentioned in the first episode, in my rebooted MCU, Captain America is not a part of it. And as you all know, the Space Stone plays a pivotal part in both Captain America's film and the Avengers film. So the Mind Stone is going to be central to the Captain America film, but for the purposes of Phase 1, we're going to say the Space Stone crashed into Earth in a meteorite. It was discovered by Jane Foster and ended up in the hands of S.H.I.E.L.D. when they seized her stuff during the events of Thor. Now, you might also be asking, okay, if the Mind Stone plays a big role in Captain America, who hasn't been introduced yet, how does Loki control the Hulk and other characters like that during the Avengers film? Well, we're just going to say that that's part of Loki's mind control powers. Now, it's something that really doesn't get explored much in the actual MCU, but Loki is a magical being. He has magical powers and capabilities. The only issue is that we really don't see that side of him in the MCU, and I think that it'd be important to establish that in my rebooted MCU, especially for a project coming up in this particular phase. So with that being said, again, we're just going to say that he was mind controlling the Hulk and every other S.H.I.E.L.D. member that he managed to get under his control. And specifically in the Hulk's case, once the Hulk was defeated on the helicarrier, his spell wore off. So now that we've sort of cleared up that loose end, let's jump into the four projects I'm going to talk about in part one of my rebooted MCU Phase 2. And the first project is Captain America, the First Avenger. And I'm going to go ahead and say that casting-wise and villain-wise, there's not much of a change. We still have Steve Rogers, who eventually becomes Captain America, played by Chris Evans. Bucky Barnes, his sidekick, is still played by Sebastian Stan. Peggy Carter is still played by Haley Atwell. And Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, is still played by Hugo Weaving. Now, the Mind Stone is the central stone of the story. And despite this, most everything stays the same until the very end. So we're going to say that at the very end, Bucky actually accompanies Steve to face the Red Skull. And we see the Red Skull use the Mind Stone. He holds it in his hand, but it flashes and his face completely disappears. His body falls lifeless and he's seemingly dead, but he's not really dead. So, following this, one of the two bombs that the ship that Captain America and Bucky are on explodes, and both Bucky and the Mind Stone fall below, seemingly killing them. Now, Steve still makes his crash landing and is frozen. And another main difference here is that when he wakes up, Nick Fury doesn't greet him, but Iron Man and Black Widow do. And they say that he was uncovered during a recent S.H.I.E.L.D. mission taken on by Black Widow. And that's really the only major changes. Now, something else I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the post-credit scenes that will come up. And in this post-credit scene, there's only one, and it's just showing that Bucky is frozen in ice. And we also see the Mind Stone with him. So that's the changes to Captain America, the First Avenger. Again, it's the kickoff to Phase 2. And it's really the only project that has minor changes. As you'll see with the next three that I'm going to talk about today, they do have some major changes. So the next project is still Iron Man 3. But we have some major changes to this film. So the film centers on the Ten Rings seeking to take advantage of the weakened state of the US following the Chitauri invasion. And this introduces us to the villain of the film, Zhu Wenwu, aka the Mandarin. I'll be referring to him as Zhu Wenwu. He is still played by Tony Leung, but I think that it's fitting, since this is the final solo Iron Man film, to make his main comic villain the central villain of this movie. So we see that Zhu Wenwu is making public boasts about the power that the Ten Rings give him and his ability to conquer all people. And we sort of see something similar to what happened in the first film, except James Rhodes, not Happy Hogan, is attacked and hospitalized by Ten Rings goons. This leads Iron Man to release his address, and he is still attacked at his mansion after he calls out Zhu Wenwu. However, the biggest change is, instead of ending up in Tennessee, Tony is rescued by Nick Fury, who tells him that he cannot solve the issue of Zhu Wenwu on his own, and he assigns a new recruit, a man by the name of Clint Barton, who is still played by Jeremy Renner, who turns out to be Hawkeye, the world's greatest archer, to work with Stark to find the Ten Rings base of operation in order to foil their plans. So this entire movie sort of turns into a clash between Tony and Clint, as they're both sort of hard-headed individuals, and it sort of turns into a good cop, bad cop, buddy cop film, with both of them sort of taking alternate ways of how they want to do things and not agreeing with each other. And it eventually ends up with both of them finding the Ten Rings base of operation, but it turns out to be a decoy. All along, Zhu Wenwu went to capture Pepper Potts from Stark Industries, and this ends up to a showdown between Zhu Wenwu, who is controlling the Ten Rings, facing off against Iron Man, Hawkeye, and War Machine, who is healed from his earlier injuries. So just like in Iron Man 3, we're going to say that Iron Man utilizes all of his suits in battle, and we even get a glimpse at Pepper Potts using one of the suits. And another difference is that Zhu Wenwu is killed after War Machine and Iron Man combine their repulsor beams, ultimately destroying him. And the movie still ends with Tony having the shrapnel removed from his chest, and we still see that he's suffering from the mental effects of flying through the portal and seeing the nuclear bomb explode in space at the end of Avengers. Now, the post-credit scene shows Zhu Wenwu's wife holding up two small children, and when I say small children, I mean they are still infants, they are babies, they're very young, showing them a picture of Tony Stark and telling them that their entire life's mission will be to destroy Stark and everything he's built. And you might can see what that's going to set up, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. You're going to have to wait a few more episodes to find out about that. So that's Iron Man 3. Again, Iron Man 3 is a very divisive film within the MCU. So I really hope that, I think adding Clint in this film makes it a little bit better. And again, I think that having Zhu Wenwu come in and really solidify himself as a nemesis to Iron Man sort of helps fix the final Iron Man movie's issues. So that's the second project of Phase 2. As you see, it's very different from the actual film we got. So that's why, again, I'm splitting this into two parts. So let's move on to the third project of Phase 2. So the third project is Thor Rampage of the Hulk. That's right, no Thor the Dark World, we have Thor Rampage of the Hulk. So the story follows the events of the first Avengers film, with Thor needing to return the Space Stone and the newly arrested Loki to Asgard. After he does this, he returns to Earth, and he sees Jane, who he discovers is running tests on Bruce Banner to see what can be done about the Hulk and his transformations. Thor, in an attempt to not only impress Jane, but also help his friends, decides that it's probably best if Banner is looked at by Asgardian priests. They deal with magical issues all the time, and he believes that something like the Hulk could be cured by Asgardian priests. So he decides to take both of them to Asgard. While all this is going on, Loki receives a visit from the two villains of this film. The first is the Enchantress, played by Blake Lively, and the Executioner, played by Carl Urban. He's in prison, of course, but the Enchantress and Loki are friends because they both have an affinity for magic. And Loki tells the Enchantress about another Infinity Stone, or a stone as he calls it with great power, and a buyer who would reward both of them if they found it. He says it is located in Svartalheim, the land of the Dark Elves. But in order to get to the stone, she would need more muscle than what the Executioner can provide. As the Enchantress leaves the prison, she sees Thor and Jane leaving the temple. She decides to secretly enter to see what's going on, and sees Bruce Banner being looked at by Asgardian priests. Using her mind control, she takes control of the Incredible Hulk and causes him to wreak horror and havoc over Asgard. An enraged Hulk overpowers both Thor and Heimdall, and the Enchantress uses Heimdall's sword in order to transport her, the Hulk, and the Executioner away to Svartalheim. Thor is reprimanded by Odin, who orders that Jane be sent back to Earth and that Thor figure out a way to fight the Enchantress and restore Asgard to its rightful glory. Thor tells Jane it's too dangerous for her to stay around, and she is sent back to Earth. Now, just like in Thor the Dark World, Thor decides to break Loki out because Loki talks to Thor and tells him that he controlled Hulk back on Earth, and that if there's one person who could definitely break the spell that the Enchantress put on the Hulk, it would be him. So Thor and Loki, through their adventures, again just like in Dark World, they arrive on Svartalheim and discover that thousands of Dark Elves have been slaughtered by the Hulk. So Thor and Loki ultimately come face to face with the Enchantress, who is holding the Reality Stone. So just like in the Dark World, the Reality Stone does play a major part of this movie. And this leads to Hulk and Thor facing off. As Hulk is completely overpowering Thor, Loki breaks the spell and calms him down. As the Hulk transforms back into Banner, Banner tells Thor that he needs to go away because the Hulk cannot be controlled. The Enchantress says, "I have no more use for you. Go back whence you came," and uses the sword to send Banner back to Earth. The Reality Stone then breaks apart and flies into the Executioner, who becomes enraged. With increased strength and stamina, he starts attacking Thor and Loki. He ultimately kills Loki and begins to attack Thor, but not only Thor, also the Enchantress. This leads to the Enchantress and Thor teaming up. The Enchantress is able to momentarily stop the Executioner using her magic, as Thor delivers a finishing blow with his hammer. The Reality Stone reforms, and Thor commands the Enchantress use an incantation to make a special capsule to hold the stone, and she does. Using the power of the Bifrost, Thor returns to Asgard with the Enchantress. The Enchantress is arrested, and just like at the end of the original Dark World movie, we find out that Loki really isn't dead, and Thor leaves to head back to Earth. So as you can see, it's a very different story. Again, I want to focus on the Hulk because, as you will see, there will be more focus on the Hulk in the next phase. I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys there's no Hulk movie in this phase, but he does get a movie in phase 3, and again, we'll get to that. But in terms of the first post-credit scene, we see Heimdall delivering the Reality Stone to the Collector. So the Collector still gets the stone, and this will be played off in a later film. And then in the second post-credit scene, we see that Jane breaks up with Thor. So again, Jane doesn't play a major role in this film, and we see that she breaks up with Thor, and this sort of creates a tension for them that will be resolved later. So don't be upset that they're gone. This is not the end of Jane. We will see her again. So that's Thor 2, Rampage of the Hulk. And again, I really don't know why we never saw the Enchantress. I'm assuming because DC introduced a similar character in the original Suicide Squad, but I think she's a very interesting character, and it's a shame we really never got to see her on the big screen in the Thor film. So with that being said, let's move on to the final project I'm going to talk about in part 1. So the fourth project of phase 2 is Fantastic Four: Battle of the Deep. So this movie opens with Reed working in his lab as he's trying to conduct more research on the cosmic rays that gave the Fantastic Four their powers. Sue comes in and tells him it's time to go to bed, but he says that he needs to finish his research. Before the title card pops up, we see a blue screen flash before Reed's eyes. The next morning, Reed tells the team that he discovered the reason they were impacted by the cosmic rays is that he incorrectly calculated how powerful the impact of the waves would be on the exterior of the ship. And the only way they can rediscover the wave and figure out the source of their power is to build a ship made out of something that can repel the waves, something known as vibranium. Johnny asks why they don't use their powers just to help out like the Avengers do, and Reed says that their mission is to find ways to build cities and better the world, not destroy them. Reed says that he has built a device that can locate vibranium, and the prime location that the device targeted is somewhere deep in the ocean. Reed then shows off a submarine that he's been constructing the night before and that the group will use. Both Johnny and Ben raise concerns about being underwater, as Johnny is made of fire when he's using his powers, and Ben is a giant rock monster. Two of those things in an enclosed space do not seem like it's going to go over well. But Reed tells them to put aside their fears and think of the advancements that could be made in the field of science. If they can find a way to get back to space and figure out what caused their powers, it could lead to breakthroughs in many different fields. The next morning, the group dive underwater, but are attacked by Namor, the Submariner, who is played by Raul Castillo. Again, unfortunately, this film takes place earlier in time, so the actor who plays Namor in Black Panther Wakanda Forever is not going to be cast, but Raul Castillo is a great actor, and I think he would do a great job as Namor. So the team fights Namor, but Namor easily overpowers them as he has the strength of the Hulk, especially when he's in water. And Namor tells Reed that it's people like him that has led the nation of Atlantis to be isolated over the years. Someone who wants to come in and take what is rightfully theirs. Namor takes Sue after he proclaims that she is not like the other Earthlings that he's ever met, and decides that she will be his new queen. A defeated Reed, Johnny, and Ben return home, and Johnny is taking the loss of his sister particularly hard. He sits down with Ben to ask what the point of having all this power is if he can't protect the ones he loves. Reed overhears the conversation and decides the only way they can get Sue back is if they build a submarine that is stronger and more capable than the one before that will allow them to go down and fight Namor. Reed fires back up his vibranium detector and gets a notification that there's a location in East Africa that holds a small amount of vibranium. After informing both Johnny and Ben of this discovery, he digs through his research and finds that this location is the mythical nation of Wakanda, a place that's only talked about in legends but seems more real now than ever. Reed, Johnny, and Ben travel to East Africa, but as they land, they are captured by Wakandan soldiers. They are brought before King T'Chaka, and they explain the situation with Namor. King T'Chaka, along with Princess Shuri, Queen Ramonda, and his son, Prince T'Challa, who is played by none other than Michael B. Jordan. And the reason for this recast is because Black Panther is going to play a much bigger role in the MCU moving forward. Unfortunately, because of Chadwick Boseman's death in real life, I think that was going to be Marvel's original plan, but it's no longer possible because of the circumstances. So that's why we are making this change. But back to the story. Upon hearing their story, King T'Chaka tells them that they do not accept outsiders and that this once they will allow them to leave, but that they will not give them vibranium or assist in any outsiders, as Wakanda is a nation that it likes to be off the map because if they become known, people will attack them for their resources. Suddenly, Namor appears and reprimands the king for talking with the enemy, saying that both Atlantis and Wakanda are supposed to be hidden nations, and the more they open up to outsiders, the greater the threat that they will be conquered. Suddenly, Atlantean soldiers capture King T'Chaka, Princess Shuri, and Queen Ramonda. The soldiers almost capture T'Challa, but he shows off exceptional fighting prowess. Namor then floods the sacred halls of Wakanda and warns Reed Richards that if he and his team attempt to return for vibranium, they will kill the Wakandan royal family to show that they are not messing around. Following this, Prince T'Challa is named the temporary king of Wakanda and tells Reed that he is out of options and must team up with him and the other members of the Fantastic Four, saying that he must use the gift of his ancestors to protect his family. This is where we are first introduced to the Black Panther. T'Challa also allows the use of the Wakandan submarine to house the team along with members of the Dora Milaje along their trip to Atlantis to fight Namor. The team travels to Atlantis with Mr. Fantastic, Human Torch, The Thing, and Black Panther fighting Namor, with Sue eventually joining in. Namor is ultimately defeated when Mr. Fantastic and Black Panther land a finishing blow. Namor agrees to peace with Wakanda in exchange for their prisoners, as well as aid in any future conflicts that Wakanda might find themselves in. The temporary king, Prince T'Challa, agrees to these terms. Namor wishes Sue Storm farewell, and she blushes, leading Reed to question what happened between the two. King T'Chaka says that while he can't supply the Fantastic Four, since they are outsiders with vibranium, he will reward the team with the Wakandan submarine as a token of their gratitude for their help. Reed realizes that the submarine is made out of vibranium, giving them the materials they need to build their ship to go to space, and allows the king to give them vibranium without actually breaking the code of not giving vibranium to any outsiders. King T'Chaka also declares the Fantastic Four as friends of Wakanda, and the film ends. Now, the post-credit scene shows Atuma, who is the highest up of the Atlantean Guard, sharing his frustration with other Atlantean guards about Namor's leadership and the fact that he went too easy in how he treated Wakanda's king, queen, and princess. And that's the first 4 projects of Rebooted MCU Phase 2. So we have 3 more projects left that we will talk about in the next episode. I know this is a little bit longer of an episode, but again, I hope you guys enjoyed the storytelling. I worked on this pretty hard. Please leave your comments down below, share your thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you all in part 2. Take care.